right, guys, welcome to another episode of Benny and the Guest. With you, as always, is me, Ben. I'm joined today by, I didn't get a chance to ask him, but I believe I heard it said as Eapen Thampy.
Yep.
Yeah?
Yep.
Okay. Lovely to meet you, Eapen. Thank you for coming on the show today.
No problem. Pleasure to be here.
Eapen has been involved with a lot of the cannabis, I guess, movement that happened in Missouri in the past basically 10 years, kind of that giant movement forward, as well as lately he's been involved with some other stuff. We'll get there. But for now, even if you just want to go over your kind of where are you from, what your childhood was like, and what kind of led you into your adulthood, and what went on there.
Well, I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri. Missouri, if you live 45 minutes outside of St. Louis. During my high school years, I became obsessed by high school policy debate. And my sophomore year, there was a debate topic that was basically about the Fourth Amendment and privacy issues, which on a functional basis meant it became a war on drugs topic. I remember, there was a team just down the street from me from another school. They were running a debate case to legalize marijuana. There was another team in the district that was trying to legalize all drugs. From a Catholic school, no less.
Yeah, that's
I kind of picked up on a esoteric area of law, civil asset forfeiture. But that time period is kind of when I began engaging the literature, and a lot of the arguments that were being made at the time made a lot of sense to me.
yeah.
And that was like, what, 20, 23, 24 years ago, if I can date myself. So, it's been really extraordinary having that background as a kid and watching the progression of all these things through, over 2 decades.
It seemed like you started at a young age. That shows like really diving into like, hey, this is what I think or whatever, and it kind of led you on further, right?
Yeah, absolutely. In college, went to University of Missouri Columbia, and was fortunate to meet a lot of folks in the community. There was a friend of mine who was an engineer in town, but he had a radio show. And over 20 years, he had just about every psychedelic luminary you could imagine on his radio show. His name is Mike Hagan. He still has a public radio music show out in Columbia, Missouri. And he was personal friends with Terrence McKenna before he passed.
Oh, wow.
His brother, Dennis. And, so that was kind of a time where, I'd begun engaging with this literature in high school. And then, during college, this kind of became more concrete. And then in 2009, I started the marijuana legalization movement here in Missouri. Over the years, that led me to Denver, Colorado. I was there in 2012 for 8 or 9 months with the Amendment 64 campaign. And in 2012, if you're in the United States and in drug policy, you're either in Seattle or Denver. So that was really a great exposure to a lot of the visionaries and luminaries in drug policy. I got to meet Ethan Nadelman, a lot of people,
Yeah.
And some of the, visionaries in drug policy at the time were beginning to talk about psilocybin and ayahuasca and other psychedelic modalities. That began piquing my interest because, as you know, we have a lot of data historically over the last 60 years in terms of clinical research on these therapies. And I met an Army veteran, Matt Kahl, Kahl. He had a nonprofit called Veterans for Natural Rights. And he'd come to Colorado for the legal cannabis, and he found healing in psilocybin and ayahuasca. Um, he went down to South America several times. There's two great documentaries, one I think that he produced and one that he was just a part of on YouTube that you can watch. One of them is called From Shock to Awe, and then the other one is Soldiers of the Vine. And as you can
Huh.
guess, he's part of or leading groups of veterans down to Peru or South America, someplace for ayahuasca ceremonies. And so that kind of percolated for a few years, and I reconnected with him in 2015 because it seemed that there was beginning to be some organization there. And, I felt, and this series kind of been borne out, but I feel the psychedelic access movement is moving much faster than marijuana
Yeah, I could agree with that. It's
for a lot, yeah, for a lot of different reasons. But Matt, he had connections here in Missouri, so we brought him back to Missouri. We toured the state a couple times, introduced him to some folks. It was hard organizing 9 years
yeah,
ago.
yeah, yeah. Just that long ago, it's crazy. But 9 years, it was like because I'm from Missouri originally, and I'm in the middle, it's kind of south of Columbia, but it's in those areas, you're crucified if you did that kind of stuff. People
Where
look
from?
Vienna, if you ever heard
Oh
of
yeah,
it. Yeah, I'm from Vienna originally. So
yeah.
all that area, it was people can drink when they're underage, but you do any of that type of stuff, you're looked down upon, and your life is going to go downhill. Which like now it shows, just it's not that way at all. And I think like you're talking about the psilocybin, especially that is gaining much more traction just because it shows even less negative side effects than most. So it's
So you're from Marys County.
yeah, Marys County, yeah.
Yeah. So you're not if my memory serves me, maybe 45 minutes east of the Lake of the
Yep.
Ozarks, hours south of Jefferson City.
Yeah. Yeah, like right there.
Yeah, I think I've driven through Vienna.
Yeah, you probably saw one flashing light and got through it. That was about it. There ain't nothing there.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, yeah. So we've been kind of organizing for 9 years. We did our first public-facing event fundraiser in 2020. We got our first legislation filed in 21. We had our first set of hearings in 22. Um, the House of Representatives gave initial unanimous approval to a psilocybin bill in 23. In 24, the Senate gave unanimous approval to a psilocybin bill as an amendment, although it didn't end up making it through the entire process, not because of anything to do with the issue, just more because of the lateness in their sessions time, and it wasn't enough time to send that bill back to the House and then to the governor kind of deal. We've also begun really working with Brian Hubbard at the Reed Foundation on Ibogaine access.
Oh,
Yeah, Missouri is, I believe, the first state in the union to allocate opioid settlement dollars to its to any kind of psychedelic research. The initial proposal was for Ibogaine research. Unfortunately, that caught a little bit of flack from bureaucrats in our Department of Mental Health, and they ended up like reformatting it to a psilocybin funding opportunity, which the RFI deadline was, I think, in November. But I would say we're really anticipating hopefully some real movement on the issue next year.
yeah, that's an exciting one I didn't know about because Ibogaine, from all the stuff I listen to, and especially like you said, a lot of military guys, um, that stuff does wonders for decreasing or eliminating addiction to stuff. and then also it's like non-habit forming or anything. It's not addictive. Like it's just a very powerful experience. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the gist of what I've got from it.
Psychedelics seem to be like anti-addiction drugs in terms of being able to reduce or even eliminate dependence on physiologically addictive drugs. Not to say that they can't be misused or that people might, reckless psychonauts, as I term them, may develop a, psychological dependence on them. But from a standpoint of, exiting alcohol addiction, methamphetamine addiction, opioid addiction.
Yeah. Sorry, my daughter just gave me a gift.
Okay.
Yeah. So you were saying, I'm sorry, it was it gave you it helped with those type of substances, like getting rid of that meth, opioids, and any of that
Yeah,
type.
the most common thing I hear about psilocybin is from a young man between the ages of 20 and 30 who says, I ate too many mushrooms and I haven't drank in 6 months.
Yeah, that's probably right.
Yeah, that's the most common
Yeah.
common thing I hear.
Do, do you find it really hard to like, I mean, I'm sure you have your own opinions, but then you also have to lobby, so you have to make everything sound right. Are you going to these, do people picture a lobbyist as like a guy in a suit going running
I wear
around
a
with,
suit.
well, yeah, yeah. No, I mean like wearing a suit though, running around having dinners every day with like politicians trying to get it going. How's that work for you with, especially with this type of subject that is so, it seems to be ostracizing to people, to be frank. Like it's very, either people support it a lot or they seem to be very against it. How do you go about that? And, what's the process like for you?
You know, you have to be respectful. You have to have the facts, right? But at the end of the day, the argument, I think, really only goes one way. And let me give you an example. So in 2022, we had our first hearing on a psychedelic access bill, and it was kind of sun and moon and the stars, right? We had this bill that we're like, let's decriminalize personal possession of all psychedelics and create a regulated access framework for those who need it for therapeutic purposes. And it had been the first time, I'm sure, since Prohibition that these ideas had been discussed in a legislative arena. And the initial response was not great. We were in front of a tough committee. About half of the committee members were like, this sounds really good. We should give this a try. And about the other half were like, heck no. And actually, it wouldn't have been that bad, except we had a member of the community, good guy. I think he meant well, but he came up and decided to testify. And, it was kind of it was not phrased or articulated in a manner that was compelling. He tried to describe the psychedelic experience and compare it to uh, the experience of orgasmic sex. And
Oh Lord.
I was just like, man, like you can get away with talking, you can get away with saying a lot more in a lawmaker's office than you can in an open committee hearing where there's media and everyone's like watching everyone else to see how they're reacting. And and the bottom line is like the advocacy matters. We certainly respect and appreciate the individual liberty that everyone has, but you really getting legislation passed is difficult enough as it is, and the quality of the advocacy really matters. And there was a specific representative from Southwest Missouri. I'm not going to say his name, but man, he was like, these are all dangerous drugs. And are you trying to overturn the war on drugs and all this? Is not a friendly line of questioning.
Sure. And
But
that seems like he's bringing the same emotion that other guy with the orgasm stuff, right? That other guy is just bringing that same energy with like, you guys are trying to destroy the world. What are you doing?
Right. And, I'm sitting in the audience next to another lobbyist colleague of mine, and turn around and I whisper to him, give me 1 year and I'm going to flip that guy. you know, and so that summer, our Speaker of the House had appointed an interim committee on veteran mental health and suicide prevention. And that is when I got connected with the good folks at the Grunt Style Foundation, if you're familiar
Sure.
with them.
Oh yeah.
All right. So Grunt Style is a well-known patriotic apparel brand out of San Antonio. They stood up a foundation in St. Louis 4 years ago, and I got connected with Will Wisner, their executive director, and Tim Jensen, their board president, and we brought them down to Jefferson City on a hot August day, and they go in that hearing, and the committee chairman, Dave Griffith, I mean, man, the statistics on veteran suicide are horrific.
Yeah, they're
Right?
real bad.
He's like, he was a guy who gave us our first like really positive feedback. He's like, I am not taking any options off the table on this issue. And Tim Jensen and Will Wisner, they went up to testify, and they gave very powerful testimonies. And I had always, I have not experienced ayahuasca or Ibogaine, but I'm aware that they're very powerful modalities. And I was like, how the heck am I ever going to explain these medicines to a lawmaker? And those guys just went up and pounded it out and gave a very powerful testimony. And the result was the next year we had, instead of going through a less friendly committee, we go through the House of Veterans Committee, and we get unanimously passed out of there with the psilocybin bill, and we went to the floor and just had a ton of support. So, and this representative I mentioned, this gentleman from Southwest Missouri, he flipped his vote to be a yes.
Yes, you got him. Yes.
And he's very conservative, very very Christian, and you have to meet people where they are.
Mhm.
There is a strong libertarian streak, particularly in Southwest Missouri sentiment. A Christian libertarian sentiment, if I may. If God put these things on the earth, they have a purpose to benefit mankind, and we should not restrict access, especially, and it's so easy, and it's a winning argument every time when you compare the apocalyptic devastation that pharmaceutical opiates have brought to us.
Absolutely.
And not just that, but SSRIs, overprescription of SSRIs, and just a general tendency in modern medicine to pump people full of pharmaceutical drugs that are relatively useless.
Yeah.
So,
the crazy part is like you said, a lot of this stuff, it was put here by God, right? That's all like natural remedies that people mostly use for a long, long time. And this other stuff is like, so it got pushed through so fast, and it was like, that was man-made by like somebody in a lab and stuff. And it's crazy that everyone's so scared of the natural stuff. I hope that's a turning point now. It seems like it's getting that way.
Yeah, and it also kind of highlights another issue that is very present for me, but like, I respect and appreciate all my liberal, Democrat, atheist friends from San Francisco and LA and New York. But I think part of the reason, and I have a ton of respect and appreciation, particularly for Ethan Nadelman, who's a unqualified genius, right? But a lot of the leadership in what I can kind of consider the establishment drug policy world are liberal Democrats from the coasts, and they don't like having to present advocacy that is conservative, faith-based, And I mean, and I've seen that, in marijuana advocacy for years. Um, and I'm like, guys, either from an industry or an ideological perspective, the simple fact is you have to meet people where they are,
Yes.
right? And it's why I think it's one of the reasons why the veteran movement on psychedelics has been so effective, right? Because, a lot of men and women who go into the military come from heartland, rural America. They grow up believing in, God, family, and country,
Hmm.
and they go out to serve. They come back with wounds and the traumas of war, and um, you know they either go to a big city or they come back to the family farm, right? And um, Brian Hubbard talks about the spiritual desolation and the despair that is found in so many rural communities that have been decimated by decades of exporting jobs and manufacturing abroad and the consolidation of agriculture, and so you come back to Vienna, Missouri, or you come back to Chillicothe, there's not much for you
Yeah.
if there's not much, right? And so um, you see, and you see this like kind of spiritual desolation, not just in the rural parts of the uh, state, but also in different. It looks different. It's presents differently in the cities, but it's pervasive. And so you have a guy who comes back from service, kind of muddles around for 5-10 years, and one of his buddies like, hey man, you hear about this psychedelic tea in the Amazon? And they go down there, and it's like 10 years of therapy in one night, and you reconnect with your inner divinity, and you may commune with God and your ancestors, and you come back and you're changed and you have a purpose. And that to me is a really kind of definitional characteristic of the veteran movement and why it's been so effective so quickly, because like it's an easy play for the liberal Democrats in San Francisco who want to end drug prohibition. That's an easy argument for them, but to articulate that in ways that resonate and are palatable to Baptists in
Yeah.
Joplin, Missouri, or you know Methodists in northern Missouri, right? That's or Catholics in eastern Missouri, right? That is a real challenge, and you just simply can't do that if you don't understand these people, if you don't understand where they come from, what they believe in, and is what what resonates, right? And I actually find that talking about the spirituality and the inner divinity that psychedelic medicine can help reawaken, I found that to be a very effective way of communicating with religious conservatives. Because when we talk about things like the opioid epidemic or the methamphetamine epidemic or alcoholism or any other addiction, the primary thing that they see in their communities is this spiritual isolation, spiritual desolation, and no one talks about it.
Yeah. I 100% agree with that because as an active duty soldier, and then the guys I see at home, a lot of them have issues like that where they bottle stuff up or drink it down or do whatever, or they just get handed, especially right now at like the VA and stuff, you get handed a bag of pills and they say that's supposed to fix a lot of it because they don't invest in that. You explaining it like you did is why I see, I guess, why you're a good lobbyist, because it's like that shows like you're able to translate it to where everybody can understand the good part about it. And I think when exactly like you said, when you just have to translate it in a way people understand, it speaks volumes on it and why it's good. And like it's not like it's not like a bad or good thing. It was just it's supposed to be a good thing. I'm just trying to show you in your mind why it's a good thing as opposed to in their mind it's a good.
Yeah, the real challenge of addiction is spiritual despair, existential terror, right? Um, and because addiction is fundamentally a condition of isolation. You're isolated from those who love you and who you're closest to, your family. You're isolated from your community. You're isolated from your own spirit, right? Um, and to have a practice or a modality that reawakens. I keep talking about Brian Hubbard, and
No, no, that's
maybe
fine. Yeah.
maybe you should have him on because he is just so good at saying this. But um, just to experience and be reconnected with the divine, both the inner divinity that you're created with, as well as the outer divinity that we call God, and to understand that that divinity is a pure and unconditional love, right? That is a very powerful thing,
Yes.
right? And that is because you can put someone in a 12-step program, you can put someone in a rehab for opiates, and you're healing the symptoms, but you're failing to address the cause, right? Which is why the rehab industry is so lucrative. You
Yes.
know, they don't have a good model that solves that. Because because sure, you can get me off heroin or fentanyl or OxyContin or whatever, but if I have nothing to live for, nothing that I can believe in, that I can't even recognize, I can't even love myself, you know, that drug is something that I'm just going to go back to because it's a way for me to numb myself to that reality.
Yeah, that's the best explanation I've ever heard is that spiritual desolation with finding divinity because it don't matter if you're Christian, Islam, Buddhism or whatever in taking like those kind of I guess I don't know if you experiences like with the Ibogaine or ayahuasca and stuff, you're finding that inner self and stuff, but then those rehab places, all that stuff, they never provide that. They just provide a we can get you off of this, but we can't provide you meaning and purpose in your life, which is what most people want. It's like a basic need is that purpose in life, and maybe that's what people are getting shown through
Yeah.
those experiences. Eapen, what do you got as of right now since you got that, 23 and 24 you're getting stuff passed? What are you working on now?
Well, we'd like to actually pass a good psilocybin bill. I think that next political cycle is a good time to do it. The opposition that's kind of emerged has been from actually interests connected to the marijuana industry. Yeah. And I
It's
think
kind of interesting.
they have two basic ideas here. Number one, there are interests in Missouri's marijuana industry that are also involved with equity funds that are promoting and trying to develop patented pharmaceutical psychedelic variants, right? Um, so
Is that like a uh synthetic version of those or
there's a lot of research being done to see if we can provide the benefits of neuroplasticity and neurogenesis without the psychedelic experience, right? Without, and I think that, and sometimes some of that sounds reasonable, especially when you're talking about Ibogaine. Can we create a Ibogaine analog that does not pose cardiovascular risks? That seems like right. And we're not opposed to development of patented clinical pharmaceutical psychedelics, um, we may discover something that has new and beneficial properties without some of the risks, right? But at the same time, we strongly believe in the naturalistic psychedelic therapies that have been utilized in so many cultures around the globe, for millennia. Um, so that's so what, like I said, there's equity groups that are out there tied to the marijuana industry that want to slow or delay the progress of naturalistic psychedelic access so they can get through the FDA and bring their therapy into the market, right? And we're not outright opposed, like I said, we're not outright opposed to the pharmaceutical angle here, but it can't be exclusive, right? The second, I think, um, idea that they have is that if these naturalistic psychedelic therapies are available, then they should be exclusively available through licensed dispensaries, right? So
So then
we
they,
don't,
yeah, then they get the market on it and stuff.
right? So
Yeah,
we don't support those monopolistic ideas either.
that's that
Yeah,
kind of sucks though, because it's like they're stopping the natural part before they can even get to the synthetic, when it should really be the other way. They should be helping you guys. That way there can be more. Yeah, that's crazy.
right. And you know, I just don't like that idea, right? It's psychedelics are very powerful medicines. There's a proposal out in New York, and I think that this idea has kind of been around for a while, but New York, there's a bill that wants to create a personal psychedelic like licensure. Like you sit through a course on risks and um, information about psychedelics. At the end of it, you get a permit as an adult that allows you to possess, use, and gift psychedelic mushrooms or whatever. Um, and I think that's kind of it seems to me kind of a reasonable idea, right? There's going to be a lot of challenges, with, I mean, we have to be aware of the risks, right? Psychedelics, for you have to screen. The more powerful the drug is, the more thoroughly you have to screen for contraindications, or like that airline pilot who ate mushrooms and wigged out 2 days later in a cockpit, right? Things like
Oh
that.
yeah, that was bad. That's a bad
That was
one.
that was
That was a
terrible.
really bad one though. That's a really extreme.
Yeah, and I'm speculating here, but it sounds like to me this guy was a slow metabolizer, right? About 5% of the population are slow metabolizers, so it is entirely possible in my mind that instead of a 4 to 6 hour mushroom experience, he was still tripping balls 2 days later, you know, and those kind of like where with marijuana there are not really catastrophic risks. With psychedelics there are, right? And the vast majority of the population can probably use these, with some guidance, with minimal risk, but um, you do have to be aware and be prepared. And this is going to be a tricky issue to navigate politically, right? Is how do we ensure the individual liberty that's at stake here? At the same time, we don't want a guy wigging out in a cockpit 2 days later.
I think a hard part of the U.S. in general right now is, I see it in the military heavily, but I see it like outside in general. Most like mid-level to high-level people don't like assuming risk, and
Right,
like now it's like a zero risk attitude towards everything. So now instead of like saying, oh, 90% is good, and they're like, well, there's 10% still left over, and that is so insane to me to think like there's going to be outliers in every type of drug ever. So
right,
I don't know why we can't go forward with that.
right. You know, and I think part of it is generational. Um, I also think that, politics is 4 to 6 years downstream of culture. So right now we have, I mean, if you're in elite tech circles, everyone knows the story of Steve Jobs, right? Everyone, you know, in elite social networks, psychedelic use is common, very common, right? The veteran community has been very effective at articulating, this is an individual liberty and a medical liberty issue as well. Um, I think, from a harm reduction standpoint as well, um, you know, being able to articulate the anti-addictive therapy value here is huge because in modern medicine we still do not have good therapies for addiction. You know, I mean, it's 2024, almost 2025, and we have no good way to get people off of alcohol and keep them off of alcohol, right? 12 step does a great job, AA does a great job, but and they do it through building community, right? And relationships,
Yeah, but
which is
it's not a foolproof solution, and it's not changing it. That's a mental solution, not a
right.
or chemical. I'm not that smart, but like a chemical change to your body. That's just you mentally put white knuckling it essentially for years. You know.
Yeah, I got a good friend of mine in Kentucky. His name is Martin Smith. He's a Navy veteran and a pastor. And he said a couple things. We had him out in St. Louis a couple of years ago, and he said a couple things that really resonated with me. And one of them was that within every addiction is locked a trauma, right? And I mean, that was so obvious. At the same time when he said it, it was like an epiphany, right?
Yeah, I've heard it said as addiction is not a disease. Trauma's the disease. Addiction's a symptom of it.
Yeah.
To where you try to push through all that, but it's a yeah. I'm glad to see Eapen that you're actually on the forefront of this, pushing for those. Because medical marijuana like that or any marijuana that was considered crazy back in like we said 10, 15 years ago. You were looked down on in a lot of places for it. Now it's becoming revolutionizing, and then now you guys are pushing that, which it even is getting more and more traction. I'm really happy to see you going forward with that. And I'm also really happy that you actually came on here to discuss all that and get that message out there, because I know people are getting it out there at some levels, but I don't think at the mid level it's really getting out. So I appreciate what you're doing and for coming on here to speak with me about it.
Yeah, and I do want to highlight. I don't. So there's another set of constituencies I think we've had a very positive response from. Right, first is first responders generally, EMT, police dispatch, nurses, anyone who's in an ICU, firefighters. I was talking to a firefighter in Columbia, Missouri not too long ago, and he pointed out to me, he drives down South Providence and Nifong, and he remembers there's where, this, I pulled a guy out of this, wreck, or here's where I had to resuscitate someone overdosing, and I realized he had this spatial memory of trauma. I was tied to his service in that town, and he couldn't drive around the time without reliving a lot of the things that he'd done over his career.
Yeah, he's dealing with that trauma everywhere he goes now. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other group, and I want to highlight them specifically, is law enforcement. I'm here in Kansas City. Our number one reason for resignation at KCPD is alcoholism. Being a cop is a brutal job, and I'm a big civil libertarian, so I'm a big constitutional law enforcement's a big deal for me. But kind of the flip side of that is that law enforcement is a brutal, often thankless job. And, um, there are things that you just can't unsee and that you can't forget, right? So we actually have been seeing a lot of folks in law enforcement who are very interested, and those and suicide rates in first responders and law enforcement in some cases are even higher than that of the veteran community, right? And it's not something that's talked about, especially in law enforcement, because I mean, there's just so many, institutional and social barriers to talking about these kind of injuries, right? Um, and a cop who's a good friend of mine here in Kansas City, pointed out to me, the soldier finishes his service and comes back from his war zone. The cop lives in his war zone, right? And so, being able to articulate that and address that, I think brings us a lot of credibility and a lot of interest that normally is kind of left out of the picture in these discussions in a lot of places.
Yeah, I think that's like a major issue with the police in general. They never get talked about, but they're living out. A lot of them are living out instances where the military never would. Especially nowadays, they're going through a lot worse with a lot less funds than we are. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that's a really good point to make as well. Eapen, is there anything else you wanted to go over? You hit every mark I wanted to discuss pretty much. It was for today. It was like awesome, like hearing all that.
Well, if anyone's interested in what we're doing, you can sign up on our email list at psychedelicmissouri.com. And I'm proud to say, you know, I, you know, I represented a company called American Shaman here in Kansas City that has, uh, taking some pioneering approaches in bringing some of these novel plant alkaloids and psychedelic therapies to market. I work with a clinical training program here in Kansas City that hopefully will be onboarding its first cohort of students called Midwest Psychedelic Training. But what I'm really proud of, one of the things I don't feel is appropriate or I don't like doing is, we're trying to protect and support individual liberty and constitutional freedoms and medical liberty, right? So our approach we're going to go all over the state of Missouri from Cape Girardeau to Maryville. I got a great story about when I was in Maryville last, actually. I'll get to that in a second. Um, and so and we're trying to identify, recruit, educate, but I'm kind of hands off, with the rest of the process. If you want to come up to Jefferson City and work with us in legislation and be advocates for this, that's what I do. That's what I focus on. That's where my focus is. Um, so I let the local guys organize and try to have as much organic stimulation of the grassroots as possible. So I don't try to create like a top down, this is what we're doing, and you got to fall in line, kind of deal. But so what I'm really proud of is to date we have sparked nonprofits in St. Louis, psychedelicstl.org. In Kansas City, there's a new Psychedelic Society of Kansas City. Lee Summit, our great friend and advocate and supporter, Crystal Sudduth, has a nonprofit called Elios, and her specific focus is psilocybin as a exit drug for alcohol. And there's another guy here in Kansas City, Valder Crowder. He's starting a group called Mentality, and his focus is on psychedelic therapy specifically for men and those who have been incarcerated. And there is also now a psychedelic club in Joplin, Missouri, and there is a psychedelic society in Springfield, Missouri. And I don't know if we got any like formal nonprofit in Columbia, but we got a lot of people in Columbia. If I could say where I'd like to spend some time next year, Fort Leonard Wood, Rolla, Poplar Bluff, Cape Girardeau. That area is a little neglected, as well as, North Missouri is huge, huge, right? And very sparsely populated. Chillicothe, Hannibal, Kirksville, right up to the IR border, large, very sparsely populated areas, farming communities. We try to get around to every part of the state and meet people and have more education available and organize as much as we can, and that's kind of the game plan.
Yeah, that's I was gonna say in my area especially, I think it's underused, but the fact that you've got all those hands working in all those different areas, that's good. That's actually getting it out there, you know.
Yeah,
So you're probably never gonna hit, in Missouri. I don't know if it'll ever hit every nook and cranny, but just to get that many spots is pretty solid, you know.
I've been in 80 out of 114 counties.
Yeah, that's pretty
So,
good.
yeah, yeah.
Oh.
Probably northeast Missouri is where I've had the least experience in.
Mhm.
And then probably after that, I haven't been to like Howell County or, Boot Hill needs some attention too.
Yeah, that's like just northern Arkansas, basically. In that Boot Heel,
And that's the
that's
Ozarks, that's the
different.
true South.
Yeah, exactly. So it runs a little different than most of it, but
Yeah.
it's that's good that you're at least moving it and it's getting the needle going, Eapen. I can't thank you enough for your time. I'm glad you came on, and I hope everyone listening actually takes heed of what he's saying, because this is the stuff you're talking about. It's like you said, it's beneficial, not just for everybody, but especially with those that are suffering. It's causing a lot of healing powers that I think is good for everyone. So, Eapen, thank you for so much for coming on here.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, be sure to check that out. He said, guys, psychedelic movement, psychedelic movement.
Psychedelictheory.com.
Yeah. Thanks again, guys, for listening. Y'all have a good day.